Welcome to the Southern Pulse Agronomy research site. I'm Jason Brand and I'm a senior research agronomist with Agriculture Victoria. Have been in the industry for around 20 years now, so many of you will have seen my face around the place. Today what we're going to try and do is a bit of a virtual tour of this site at Currio. So many growers will have seen this place before. A great place to grow pulses, and we've got a lot of good results out of this research site over many years. At this site, it's not just about Southern Pulse Agronomy either. We've got two big breeding trials, so looking at field peas and lentils, and also some alternate pulses, which we might be able to touch on as the day goes on. At this site this year, we've got a number of different trials, so ranging from chickpea disease management through to fava bean germplasm adapted to dry areas, and even looking at some seed source stuff in fava beans, because last year with PBA Bendoc we noticed some big differences in seed source and the way they were growing. There's a lot of work on lentils, so we've got some work in herbicide tolerance and particularly with some of the new group C tolerance, so it's pretty exciting work coming along with a PhD student. We'll head down the hill later on and look at some seed size work in PBA Hallmark. There has been some discussions in the industry about the fact that PBA Hallmark has some small and larger seeds, so we've had a look at that a bit in trial work this year. And finally we'll work around and have a look at one of the big issues out of last year. There was a lot of pod drop going on in lentils, and we noted at this site some big differences between different varieties, and it seemed to be particularly related with varieties that stand a bit taller and more erect and flop around in the wind. One of the interests is what can we do with that agronomically? So can we sow in a different direction, have standing and tall stubble, have different row spacing? So we're having a look at that in a trial this year. So welcome to the site. We'll have a look around and talk through all the trials. Thank you. So we're going to have a look now at the chickpea novel disease management trial, and just to provide a bit of a background to the trial, this is actually done in conjunction with the pathology program. So we're going to hand over to Josh Fanning, who's the senior pathologist, pulse pathologist at Agriculture Victoria, who's just going to run you through the treatments and what we've learnt so far in previous years before we head around some of the treatments.
Hi, I'm Josh Fanning, Pulse Pathologist at Agriculture Victoria. This trial here is a chickpea disease management trial looking at the control of ascochyta blight, a collaboration between the Victorian Integrated Disease Management Program and the Southern Pulse Agronomy Program, in which we look at different ways of controlling ascochyta blight.
So just running through ascochyta, there's probably three ways I look at ascochyta and the lesions involved. Is one, this really confirms ascochyta. So you can see the little lesion on the leaf here with the little black dots in the middle. That definitely confirms ascochyta. You then end up with these stem breakages where a lesion's got on a stem, worked its way up and down the stem and causes complete breakage. The whole branch will die. And if we look down closer, you might see in some spots, see these little lighter white dots sometimes? So often they can sometimes be an indication of some early infection of ascochyta. That's what we first saw up here, but you have to wait until you actually fully see these dots to be 100% certain that that is actually ascochyta blight and not a herbicide or a fungicide effect.
So in this trial here, we're looking at the current recommendation of spraying before you see the signs of disease for chickpea ascochyta blight, comparing it to spraying after you've seen the disease. So once those first symptoms have appeared. And we've got some newer chemistries in there. So we're looking at tebuconazole plus azoxystrobin, Veritas, and bixafen plus prothioconazole, or Aviator, and spraying these before the first signs of infection compared to after you've seen the chickpea ascochyta infection in the plants. And we've found that they're actually quite comparable in this drier environment over the last couple of years. However, this year, in a wetter year, we're seeing that those two chemistries are struggling to pull the disease up if you didn't put it out prior to the first signs of infection. It'll be interesting pulling all these results together.
So we're down now at the fava bean trials, and we'll touch on first of all the germplasm trial, but afterwards we'll head over to the trial where we're looking at PBA bendoc and different seed sources. So in the germplasm trial, many people will know that over many years we've actually got some really good bean yields up here at Pete's place. We've had yields above 5 tonnes per hectare, particularly in those wet years, so 2016, and certainly as low as less than half a tonne per hectare in beans. One of the big opportunities coming through in beans is some of these varieties that are adapted to drier areas, and there's a new line that's been exciting us over a number of years, and it's demonstrating its benefits again this year. So hopefully we'll be able to show this on camera. So this AF 1225, if we look at it early at this point of time here, you can already see that it's got pods starting to form down low in the canopy. So this one here, this pod's already started to form, and there's a couple of flowers there, so 2 of those pods are starting to form nice and low in the canopy. This one's been flowering for several weeks at this point of time. Then we move over to PBA Samira, which obviously is a really well adapted line and will continue to yield well, most widely adapted variety that we've got. But if we compare it to 1225, which has regularly out yielded it at this dry site, you can see how its flowers are higher up in the canopy than what we had with 1225. They haven't set any pods yet, so we're seeing that much later flowering. Obviously for harvestability, we want the pods up higher in the canopy, but in terms of yield in these dry zones, we want varieties that can set pods when it's cold and get that yield on board before it dries out later in the season. So hopefully that demonstrates what we're trying to achieve in this trial site here. This variety here, we've seen it yield up to 30% greater than what Samira does. So another pay bean trial I looked at this year is one where we're working closely with Seednet, and they've sourced a whole heap of different seed lots from around southern Australia, so right across to the Eyre Peninsula at Ungara and up into southern New South Wales, where they grow their seed lots of PBA bendoc. And the reason why we're doing this is because we've noticed differences in seed size and even sometimes comments from growers about growth in or different growth patterns with different seed lots. So this trial is just defining what's going on there, and so the boys behind us here are doing some biomass cuts just after flowering to see how much growth that we've got so far. And we have got some interesting treatments where there's for instance, a treatment just behind me here where we've been noticing greater vigour throughout the whole year, where the crop was grown on irrigation last year. So, we'll have a look at what the findings are. At the end of the day, yield is what matters. But really grateful to Seednet working closely with us, and hopefully we'll discover some differences in yield or not with PBA bendoc. So we're just standing in front of the trial here, which looks at a whole range of alternate legumes. While primarily this project looked at some of the summer cropping options in soybeans and mung beans, etc., we're also doing some work with a number of other different crops. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to Audrey Delahunty to run you through a number of the different species that we're looking at over winter this year.
Thank you, Jason. So this trial here is assessing a range of crops that are not commonly grown in Victoria. This is part of a project which is funded through Agriculture Victoria and GRDC, which aims to expand the legume crop options available to growers within the southern region. In the case of summer cropping, this will provide the opportunity to capture and maximise spring and summer rainfall, where sowing may not occur every year and would be determined by episodic rainfall events in your area. Additional benefits for expanding the summer and winter legume crop option is through system benefits, in particular nitrogen fixation, diversifying the cropping enterprise, and potentially the ability to increase the adaptation of legumes into regions where current legumes, pulses in most cases, are high risk. A number of the crops that we are testing also have a high value for their grain. In the trial that you're currently looking at, we have a range of crops that are adapted to winter, including the legumes narbonne bean, fenugreek and salad as some of the examples. These all have very different end uses. For example, fenugreek is typically grown for its grain, where salad, for example, is grown for its ability to remediate soil compaction. These legume crops are being compared to other species that aren't necessarily commonly grown within Victoria. As an example, we have included tillage radish. This is providing a direct comparison to salad, where both have the ability to improve the physical structure of the soil. In this trial, tillage radish stands out quite clearly, where it's got large white flowers and looks a lot like canola from afar. Another crop that is growing quite well in this trial is cumin. You may recognise cumin from your spice rack. Within this trial here, it's starting to reach canopy closure and it looks a little bit like a fern if you can see it. All in all, we're really happy with how this trial is looking, where we had really good establishment initially and subsequent growth has been quite good, which is a reflection of the season that we have had to date. Now we were looking forward to seeing how the rest of the season progresses and of course harvesting these crops. Importantly, this trial is part of a network of trials across the state, which is providing really valuable information into potential new crops for our region. Based on our summer program that ran between 2019 and 2020, we're feeling really optimistic. In this summer program, we identified a number of legume crops that were well suited to the agroecological zones across Victoria. For example, mung bean was fairly consistent with growth and also yield across the state. However, in the mallee environment, we identified as potential options cowpea, pigeon pea and lab as well as mung bean. Based on the knowledge that we're gathering from both our summer and winter experimental program, we're able to identify new legume species that have potential suitability to both our summer and winter program, which ultimately is providing new options for growers within the southern region. Thank you.
Okay, so we're standing in the seed size trial with PBA Hallmark lentils. What we did at the start of the year was just grade the Hallmark lentils anything from less than 4 mil seed size up to greater than 5 mil seed size. And the reason why we're just doing this is just to see what the variability was in growth. And just as a quick highlight is that if we stand in a plot like this one, this is a really small seed size area. So if we have a look down here in this canopy here, see the canopy hasn't even closed yet. All year it's been less vigorous and we'll be taking some cuts on that very soon. And then we turn around and have a look at this plot here and you can see how it's closing canopy already. So this is the larger seed size, so it just gives you an idea of the differences in crop growth. In front of that trial that I talked about before, which is really interested in understanding the impacts of row spacing, row direction on pod drop, and looking at different plant architectures within lentils. So what I'm going to do is just take you through the wider row spacing we have out here, which is on about 14 inches, and just walk you through a number of the different varieties that we've got in this trial. And just remember as we go through that these are also sown on narrow row spacings, just over to the side here, and then on a east-west direction as we go further up the hill over there. So just walking through here, over on our left-hand side here, we've got the variety PBA Jumbo. And so this is one of the older varieties, and you can see how it's just slowly starting to close its canopy, less vigor. The classic old PBA Bolt, the one that everyone in the mallee likes, nice and erect, flowering away happily at the moment, standing up well. So hopefully it'll hang on to its pods at the end of the year. Moving through, we have got PBA Hallmark just here. So this variety did extremely well last year throughout Victoria, and you can see a bigger plant type, slowly closing canopy, a variety that looks very promising for Victoria. And then over to the other side here, we've got a new breeding line from GIA. So they've got a line that they've developed through mutation breeding for herbicide tolerance, got a very different growth habit, and you can see this really branchy type. So it's closing in a bit shorter, obviously, than Hallmark. So we're really interested to see how this particular plant structure performs on different row spacings. At other sites, we've got this in different sorts of stubble setups as well. So looking at it in standing stubble. Just down here, we have PBA Hurricane. So everyone knows all about PBA Hurricane. Fortunately, we haven't had a big frost on it this year, so it's still looking nice and green. We've seen on Twitter a few illustrations where it's gone a bit yellow again compared to other varieties. Over here, your classic PBA Jumbo 2. So you can see the canopy is completely closed. That branching type, happily flowering away up here. It'll start moving along very quickly now. So this is one of our elite lines, and certainly the comparison point in terms of yield. And finally at the front here, we have a breeding line which dropped a lot of pods last year. So this is Chickpea 1821, very erect, extremely high yielding when you can get all the pods, but we certainly lost a lot in the trials last year. So we're interested to see whether we can change the number of pods that it drops based on row direction and row spacing, and also stubble down around the Wimmera. And finally, on the other side here, we've got a classic old variety, Aldinga. Again, just a slightly different plant type. One of the ones that used to fall flat on the ground years ago. So that's why we're comparing that with all the other varieties. We'll be very interested to have a look at the results at the end of the year. So we'll be monitoring pod drop and pod loss, and ultimately yield will be our defining factor. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mitchell Fromm. I work with Southern Pulse Agronomy based out of Horsham. Currently standing out at Currio, standing in a sowing rate by row spacing trial in vetch. This specific variety is Timok. It's one we identified as a pretty versatile variety. It seems to do pretty well over multiple regions. So what we're trying to do this year is try and learn a bit about vetch. We're kind of dipping our toe in. It's our first proper year of doing full trials. We've done some small stuff in the past, and I guess grow interest has kind of driven us expanding those trials. So pretty much all we're doing is looking at various sowing rates down from 20 plants a metre squared up to 140 plants a metre squared, and also 3 row spacings, 72 centimetres, 36 centimetres and 18 centimetres. So what we're trying to do is get a growth curve over the season. We've taken 4 biomass cuts so far through the season, 3 weeks apart, and we're looking to take that final biomass cut at peak biomass, kind of around that late flowering, early flat pod stage. So the results will be published in the Southern Pulse Agronomy 2020 field trial guide. This trial was a time of sowing trial in vetch, looking at 12 different species of vetch, and also on top of that just a few of your regulars like your fava beans and your lentils and your field peas. So this trial is all about time of sowing, so just looking at 2 times of sowing here, a bit earlier, I think it was in March, and then a bit later, probably in April. Looking at just the same kind of thing, growth throughout the season, taking those 5 biomass cuts throughout the season, and also just comparing it against a few typical species that you see out here. There's a fava bean in here, there's a field pea, and also a lentil, just to see if there's any kind of the variation between them, I guess. And also we're just doing a few simulated grazing things to see if there's any opportunity to graze during the season, and see how that plays out, and see if it can kind of regrow and catch up to the others, or see if there's any financial kind of benefit to doing it that way. So we've been working in conjunction with Stuart Nagel, who's given us a few of his new vetch varieties to work with. He's the breeder based out of Adelaide, which has been really good, and we're seeing some pretty good results out of that, which will all be published in the Southern Pulse Agronomy 2020 Trials Guide.
Welcome to the Southern Pulse Agronomy. Wow, you completely lost me now.